What's going on, everybody? Zach from thebarbellphysio.com, and today we're going to talk about what the best blood flow restriction bands out there are. So if you're not familiar with blood flow restriction, it's really emerged in the strength and conditioning and rehab worlds as a great way to get performance benefits at really low loads or low overall intensities of exercise. If you're not familiar with the science or how to actually perform blood flow restriction training, this video is not for you, but I do have a free ebook for you that you can download at thebarbellphysio.com/BFR. And that will walk you through the science and application of how to actually use it. Today, we're just gonna focus on what the best devices out there are for BFR. We're gonna use 4 different categories for essentially ranking different devices on its usefulness or lack of usefulness in terms of being a good device for BFR. Those 4 different criteria are gonna be the material that the device is made of, the size of the device, how it applies pressure, and how it measures pressure. And we'll talk about that with a number of different devices out there. I've got 3 that we'll actually show kind of live, and then we'll have a few others that we just discuss. So first criteria for determining if something is a good device for blood flow restriction is what the BFR band is actually made out of. So you'll find a variety of different devices. Number 1, you'll find some things that are elastic bands, such as this one that I just purchased off of Amazon. If you search for BFR bands, it's one of the more popular ones you'll find. Others are rigid, where they have no flexibility to it. Now, in terms of usefulness, rigid devices are significantly better than elastic devices. So elastic devices have too much ability to expand as we exercise, which is not going to do a good enough job of trapping the metabolite buildup that we see with blood flow restriction training. So we're going to lose some of the benefit by using these elastic materials, even though they are typically significantly cheaper than rigid devices. These just aren't anywhere near as good as more rigid devices. The second criteria for usefulness of BFR is the size of the device. So we'll see different devices online, and we want to specifically look at the length of the device first. So if we're using this for our legs, it needs to have enough length to it that it can completely cover the limb that you're using and then have some extra slack so that you can tighten it on top of that. We don't want it to go around a limb and not fully meet. If we saw that, then we wouldn't be able to do a good job of restricting blood flow. So size is length as well as the width. So all of the widths of the devices that I have with me are at least 1.5 inches. You'll see some devices out there that are significantly smaller than that may only be like 1 inch wide. And the problem with something that's not very wide is it then takes a lot more pressure to restrict the amount of blood flow coming in and out of a limb. And more pressure is not what we want. More pressure increases our potential risk of injury. So we want something that's wider, at least probably 2 inches wide. You'll see with things such as the Smart Cuff device here, that's 3.5 to 4 inches wide right there. So it covers a decent amount of my limb. So wider is better. The next thing we're gonna look at is how does this device actually apply pressure? So if we take some bands such as this one, I have to wrap it around my leg, kind of put it through this little blocker, and then actively pull on this elastic band to tighten it up and then lock it in place. And so that pull is usually not going to be quite as good as something such as these Saga Bands here, SAGA, or the Smart Cuff device, where when we put these on, and we'll show this in a few minutes, when you put these on, they actually inflate. There's that air bladder inside of it. It inflates, and then you can really do a good job of measuring how much pressure. But this device kind of wraps around the whole leg and then blows up. It's going to be a better application of pressure when we have one of these air-filled bladders compared to having to pull the device itself. The biggest limitation on bands such as these, besides the elasticity, is that how do we actually measure the pressure? So this band has little measurements on it, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 12 on it, so you can sort of measure how much pressure you're putting on there. But in reality, that's not going to be a very good or accurate way of measuring how much pressure we're using. If we're using Saga Bands, if we're using the Smart Cuff device, if we're using something such as the Delphi device, those have different measurements for scientifically and accurately determining how much pressure we're doing blood flow restriction, so that we know that, number 1, we're getting the stimulus that we want. Number 2, session to session, we're getting the same stimulus. I cannot accurately tie this up today at the same pressure that I could do a week from now or 2 weeks from now. So every time I go to do a workout, I'm gonna be using different levels of pressure when I use a device such as this compared to the smart cuffs or the Saga Bands. Up next, let's review a few of the popular devices out there and grade it according to these criteria and talk about which ones are actually worth you purchasing if you want to perform blood flow restriction and which aren't. So we're gonna start with the smart cuffs device, which is probably my favorite of all the ones that we're gonna talk about today. So we have our little computer unit here that I'm gonna plug up to my bands, and my bands came with 3 different sizes. I got a leg size, 2 arm sizes. They're actually intermediate that can be used for the arms or legs depending on how large your legs are. I connect that to my computer and I basically choose arm or leg and the intensity that I want to work out. Their manual will take you through the intensity and what percentage of limb occlusion pressure that intensity refers to. Again, our BFR ebook will talk you through that and help you select where you need to go. But I'm going to choose my intensity and then I will calibrate how much pressure it actually takes to create that level of intensity in terms of occlusion. So my device is blowing up right now. It's going to continue to blow up until it reaches full occlusion, where no blood flow is coming into or out of the leg, and then it will then work at that percentage of it. So it's still blowing up here. It's probably going to go up to about 200 millimeters of mercury in terms of its pressure, and then it will start to deflate and actually find that specific percentage. So I chose legs at high intensity, which is going to be 80% limb occlusion pressure is how they have their set up. I really like the low, medium, and high intensity that this has. It just simplifies it for users. If you're not using this clinically where you need to really dial that in to specific percentages, if you just need to be in the general ballpark, this is fantastic for that. So it's almost done calculating here. It calculated my full limb occlusion pressure, and now it's going to deflate. And then it will, once it fully deflates, it's gonna actually re-inflate back up to that percentage. So it's gonna inflate back up to 80%. So there it goes, it's starting to pump up. So now it reached that full pump. And I'm gonna actually come in here, I'm gonna detach the hose, attach it to my other leg, and hit enter to repeat the pressure. It'll now blow up the left side in the same manner. And so now I'll have 2 cuffs that I'm able to exercise with. So I could do some leg strengthening or some aerobic training if I wanted. And then to deflate at the end, all I have to do is come over here to the cap, press the button, and it's gonna release all of that pressure. So it really has this nice quick deflate, because when you're at the end of a BFR session, you want to get that thing deflated really, really fast because your legs are going to be burning like crazy. So it's nice to have that quick deflate option on this device. So again, love the smart cuffs device. You can use the code thebarbellphysio if you're checking out. That is my affiliate link, so I get a little bit of pay for that, which helps support me putting out videos like that for you. But that is probably my favorite device for doing blood flow restriction. We talked about these cuffs earlier. So like we talked about earlier, these different elastic cuffs that are really cheap that you can find on Amazon and other places like that. You know, their application is really simple. Just put it up as high as you can on your leg, pull it to the desired amount of tension that you want, and then wrap it up. I will say, I just pulled this as hard as I absolutely could, and it doesn't feel like there's much pressure at all. Again, as I like contract my quad, I can feel that elastic band stretching out and then recontracting. It's probably not even half as much pressure as the smart cuffs device had. So I know it's going to be nowhere near the percentages of occlusion that I actually want when performing blood flow restriction. So the next device that we're going to discuss are the Saga Bands. So the Saga Bands are a really good device. So the options I like about it: good width to the cuff, good rigid device. It feels really well put together. I've used this quite a bit and it's held up pretty well. It also comes with a smartphone app, and that smartphone app connects to the devices via Bluetooth. So all I have to do is connect the 2 devices and then calculate my limb occlusion pressure, which I'll do now. It's gonna blow up one of my cuffs. It's gonna find that limb occlusion pressure and then exercise it. So if I'm looking at my phone here, I can see that it's actually going through the calibration process here. And it's gonna blow up to full limb occlusion pressure. It will then deflate, and it's gonna let me set what percentage of that full limb occlusion pressure I want to exercise at is. It's also going to have a timer on it running as I do my workouts, which is nice so that I can really easily time my rest as I go along. But the Bluetooth feature of this are really, really nice to have in terms of its ability to measure pressure and to kind of take some of that guesswork out of yourself. Calculated that, I can confirm my pressure settings and then click begin my workout, and it's then going to blow up both of the cuffs at the same time, and I'll be able to start performing a blood flow restriction workout. So super easy device to overall get set up and to manage. Beyond that, there are two other devices that I like to talk about in terms of blood flow restriction. Number one is going to be the Occlusion Cuff. So you're going to hear that being one of the most referenced devices out there. So the Occlusion Cuff is nice. I don't have one to demo for you, but it's nice because it's basically like a fancy blood pressure cuff. So it has a little bubble that you can squeeze and blow up. It's got a pressure monitor on it, so you can blow it up as you go along and kind of know where you're at pressure-wise. The difficult part about that device versus our smart cuffs or our Saga Bands is we're going to need to use something to accurately know how much pressure we actually want to occlude. So you're going to need to get a Doppler ultrasound, which they sell on their website as well, and you'll do a Doppler ultrasound at your arm or leg to determine when you hit that maximal limb occlusion pressure, and then calculate a percentage down to that. So that adds a little extra step, a little extra bit of complexity to it. So that's why I tend to like the Smart Cuffs device or Saga Bands over the Occlusion Cuff. Final device to talk about is the Delphi device. So the Delphi device is the gold standard of blood flow restriction training. The issues with that are, number one, price tag. It's going to come in at several $1,000s. Number two, you have to be a medical provider and get certified in order to buy that device. So if you're an athlete just wanting to start to do a little blood flow restriction training, or a coach wanting to use it a little bit, there are a couple of hurdles that you have to run through there monetarily and licensure-wise, certification-wise, in order to be able to do it. But it is by far the best in terms of all the features that it has, but that comes with some other drawbacks to it. So my two favorite tend to be the Smart Cuffs device and Saga Bands that we demonstrated here today. For both of those, the code thebarbellphysio will save you some money on the purchase of that device and also support what we do here at thebarbellphysio.com. Again, please head to thebarbellphysio.com/BFR if you want to download our completely free ebook on the science and application of blood flow restriction training so you can start to use this to jumpstart your performance gains.